I did not cheat on a poor girl. I cheated on the woman who owned my entire future. The room had gone completely silent, but that came later. Right now, 3 days earlier, rain streaked down the window of a small apartment on the edge of downtown Chicago, and Olivia Carter stood frozen just outside the half-open bedroom door, her fingers tightening slowly around a thin paper grocery bag. Inside, laughter. Low, careless, intimate. A woman's voice she did not recognize. And then Jason. Warm, confident. The same voice that once whispered promises into her hair. Olivia did not need to see it. She already knew, but she looked anyway. The bag slipped from her hand, apples rolling quietly across the hardwood floor as Jason turned, startled, his expression shifting from shock to something colder, something calculating. There was no apology in his eyes, only annoyance, like she had interrupted something trivial. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. Olivia stepped into the room, her heart beating so hard it felt like it might crack her ribs, but her voice when it came was steady, almost eerily calm. How long? She asked. Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair as if this were an inconvenience he had expected. Doesn't matter, he replied, not even bothering to move away from the woman beside him. That was the moment something inside Olivia shifted. Not broke, not shattered. Shifted, like a lock quietly turning. I supported you, she said, her voice softer now, but sharper, every word deliberate. When you had nothing. Jason let out a short laugh, glancing at the other woman as if sharing a private joke. Exactly, he said, and I'm not that guy anymore. He stood, straightening his shirt, his tone growing colder, more honest than it had ever been. I am done pretending this works. I have goals, Olivia. I cannot build a life with someone who is stuck. The word hung in the air like a verdict. Stuck. Poor. Replaceable. Olivia looked at him for a long second, really looked at him, as if memorizing the version of him that no longer had a place in her world. Then she bent down slowly, picking up one of the apples from the floor, turning it in her hand before setting it carefully on the counter. You are right, she said quietly. This does not work. Jason nodded, relieved, already turning away. He did not notice the way her eyes had changed. He did not notice the calm, the absence of pain, and he definitely did not notice the black car waiting outside the building, engine running, a driver checking his watch. Olivia grabbed her coat, walked past him without another word, and stepped out into the cold night air. The rain hit her face, sharp and clean, washing something away. As she reached the curb, the driver rushed to open the door. Good evening, Miss Carter, he said. Olivia paused for just a fraction of a second before getting in, her voice steady, composed, nothing like the woman Jason thought he knew. Take me to the office, she said. It is time to stop pretending. And somewhere behind her, in that small apartment filled with cheap laughter and borrowed confidence, Jason Miller had no idea that the woman he had just thrown away was the owner of the company he was about to beg to rise in. The car door closed with a quiet, solid thud, sealing Olivia inside a different world, one that smelled like leather, control, and something far more dangerous than heartbreak. The city lights blurred past the window as rain continued to fall, but inside the car, everything was still. She did not cry. She did not reach for her phone. She simply stared ahead, her reflection faint in the glass, no longer the woman standing in that apartment minutes ago. The driver glanced at her once through the rearview mirror. Everything ready at the office, he said carefully. Olivia nodded once. Good. Her voice carried no hesitation now, no softness left to misread. The car turned onto a private drive, pulling up to a towering glass building that rose into the night sky like a monument to power. Lights were still on at the top floors. Waiting. The moment she stepped out, the shift was immediate. Security straightened. The front doors opened before she even reached them. Good evening, Miss Carter, one of the guards said, his tone sharp with respect. Olivia walked past without slowing down, her heels echoing across polished marble floors, each step steady, measured, inevitable. This was not new to her. This was where she belonged. An elevator, opened as if summoned by her presence alone. Inside, The mirrored walls reflected a woman who no longer looked uncertain. The worn coat, the quiet posture, the softness that invited underestimation, all of it was still there, but now it felt like a costume she had mastered too well. As the elevator rose, floor numbers lighting up one by one, Olivia reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring. The one Jason had given her when promises still meant something. She looked at it for a long second, then closed her hand around it tightly, not in grief, but in understanding. By the time the doors opened, she had already decided what came next. The executive floor was silent except for the low hum of machines and distant voices behind glass walls. A group of senior leaders stood as she entered the main conference room, their conversations cutting off instantly. At the head of the table stood Daniel Hayes, his posture calm, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp the moment they met hers. "You came in early," he said. Olivia stepped forward, placing the silver ring on the table with a soft, deliberate sound. Plans changed. Daniel studied her for a brief moment, then nodded once, as if that explained everything. The others in the room exchanged subtle glances, aware that something had shifted, even if they did not know what. Olivia took her seat at the head of the table, the same seat she had held for years, the same seat she had chosen to step away from when she decided to live as someone else, someone invisible. "Let us begin," she said. A tablet was placed in front of her, reports already prepared, numbers aligned, projections waiting for approval. But Olivia did not look at them right away. Instead, she leaned back slightly, her gaze moving across the room, calculating, precise. "I want a full internal review," she continued. "All departments. Performance, conduct, leadership behavior. No exceptions." One of the executives hesitated. "Is there a specific concern?" Olivia's lips curved into the faintest smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Yes," she said quietly. "Integrity." The word landed heavier than any accusation. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, understanding more than the others. He stepped forward, placing a file in front of her. "There is also something you should know," he said. Olivia opened the file, her eyes scanning quickly before stopping on a familiar name. Jason Miller, mid-level management, high growth track, recommended for fast promotion. Her expression did not change, not even a flicker, but her fingers rested on the page a fraction longer than necessary. "Of course he is," she murmured under her breath, almost to herself. Daniel watched her carefully. "Do you want him flagged?" he asked quietly. Olivia closed the file slowly, tapping it once against the table as if sealing his fate with a single, controlled motion. "No," she said. "Do not flag him." A pause. The room held its breath without realizing it. Olivia stood, smoothing her coat as she prepared to leave. "I want to see everything," she added. "Unfiltered, uncorrected. I want to know exactly who people are when they think no one important is watching." Daniel's voice lowered slightly as he followed her toward the door. "And him." Olivia stopped just before stepping out, her hand resting lightly against the glass. For a brief second, the reflection showed both versions of her at once. The woman Jason thought he knew, and the woman he had never even imagined. "Especially him," she said. Then she walked out, already rewriting the rules of a game Jason did not even know he had started. Morning came with a sharp, unforgiving brightness that spilled across the glass towers of the city, turning steel and concrete into something almost blinding. Inside one of those towers, several floors below the executive level, Jason Miller adjusted his tie in the reflection of a dark computer screen, his expression focused, confident, completely unaware that the ground beneath him had already begun to shift. The office buzzed with quiet energy, keyboards tapping, phones ringing, the low hum of ambition filling the air. Jason thrived in this environment. It was where he believed he belonged. "Big day," a colleague asked as she passed by his desk, balancing a cup of coffee in one hand. Jason smirked slightly, leaning back in his chair. "Every day is a big day when you know where you are going," he replied, his tone carrying just enough arrogance to make it sound like confidence. He had spent months positioning himself, building the right connections, saying the right things, making sure the right people noticed him. And now it was finally paying off. A promotion was within reach. Maybe more. Then one. He reached for a folder on his desk, flipping it open to review his notes for the upcoming internal presentation. His name was already circulating among upper management. Fast track. High potential. The kind of labels that open doors. The kind of labels that erase where you came from. Across the room, a small group gathered near the break area, voices lowered but excited. "Did you hear?" One of them whispered. "They're saying the owner is coming back." Like actually coming back. Jason glanced up, his interest immediately caught. "What do you mean coming back?" he asked, standing and walking over, inserting himself into the conversation with practiced ease. The woman shrugged slightly. "No one has seen her in months. Some people think she has been working remotely. Others say she was never really gone. But now there is talk of a full internal review. Everything. Every department." Jason's eyes lit up, not with concern, but with opportunity. "That is perfect," he said. "Fresh eyes mean fresh chances. If you stand out now, you do not just move up, you skip levels." He could already see it. A room full of executives. A chance to impress. A moment to prove he was not just another name in a long list of employees. He returned to his desk, his mind racing ahead, already rehearsing the version of himself he would present. Polished, driven, untouchable. He did not think about the apartment. He did not think about Olivia. In his mind, that chapter had already closed, neatly filed away as something he had outgrown. By mid-morning, the office atmosphere shifted slightly, a subtle tension threading through the air. Emails began to circulate. Notices, updated schedules, mandatory attendance for an upcoming company-wide event. Jason opened the message, scanning quickly before a slow smile spread across his face. Meet the owner night. An opportunity to present selected projects directly to leadership. Direct visibility. Direct impact. Exactly what he had been waiting for. He leaned back, folding his arms, already imagining the moment. He would walk in, deliver something sharp, something memorable, something impossible to ignore. He would be the one they talked about after. Across the floor, a new figure stepped off the elevator, dressed simply, almost understated, carrying a small folder and looking around as if unfamiliar with the space. A few employees glanced briefly before returning to their work uninterested. Just another new hire. Just another face. Jason barely looked up as she approached the empty desk near his section, setting her things down quietly. "You new here?" he asked without much interest, eyes still on his screen. "Yes," Olivia replied softly, her voice measured, controlled, carrying none of the authority she had displayed just hours before upstairs. Jason gave a short nod. "Try to keep up," he said casually. "Things move fast around here." Olivia allowed the faintest smile to touch her lips, though it never reached her eyes. "I will," she said. She sat down, turning on the computer, her reflection flickering across the dark screen for a brief moment before it came to life. Around her, the office continued as usual, unaware that the most powerful person in the building was now sitting quietly among them, watching, listening, and waiting. And just a few feet away, Jason Miller had no idea that every word he spoke from this moment forward would matter more than anything he had ever said before. The rhythm of the office settled into something predictable, but beneath it, a quiet tension began to grow, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Olivia sat at her desk, her posture relaxed, her expression neutral, but her attention was sharp, cataloging everything with precision. The way people spoke when they thought no one important was listening. The way decisions were made in passing conversations instead of formal meetings. The way power quietly shifted between personalities rather than titles. And at the center of it, Jason Miller, moving through the floor like he already owned a future that had not been given to him yet. "Olivia, right?" he said later that morning, finally turning his full attention toward her as he walked over, a folder in hand. She looked up, meeting his eyes with calm composure. "Yes." Jason nodded once, scanning her quickly, already forming a judgment. "You're on my team now. Temporary support." Do not slow things down. His tone was not aggressive, but it carried a dismissiveness that was far more telling. Olivia simply inclined her head slightly. Understood. He dropped the folder onto her desk. Start with this. Data cleanup. It is not complicated, but it needs to be done fast. Olivia opened the folder, her eyes moving across the pages. Reports. Internal metrics. Performance summaries. Nothing she had not seen 100 times before. Only now she was seeing them from the outside in. When do you need it? She asked. Jason gave a short shrug. As soon as possible. Preferably before lunch. Olivia glanced at the clock. Less than 2 hours. She closed the folder calmly. I will have it ready. Jason smirked slightly, clearly not expecting that level of confidence. We will see, he said before turning away, already moving on to something he considered more important. Around her, a few coworkers exchanged knowing looks. One of them leaned closer, lowering her voice. Do not take it personally, she whispered. He treats everyone like that. Olivia gave a small nod, though her focus had already returned to the documents in front of her. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, reorganizing, correcting, refining. What Jason had handed her as a routine task revealed something else entirely. Patterns, inconsistencies, decisions made without accountability. And Jason's name appeared more often than it should have, attached to shortcuts disguised as efficiency. By the time noon approached, Olivia closed the final file, her work complete, but her understanding deeper than anyone in that room could have guessed. She stood, picking up the folder, and walked over to Jason's desk. It is done, she said, placing it in front of him. Jason barely looked up at first, still typing, but then he paused, glancing at the clock, then back at her. Already? He asked, a hint of surprise slipping through. Olivia nodded once. You can review it. He opened the folder, flipping through the pages, his expression slowly tightening as he realized the level of detail. Corrections highlighted, notes added, suggestions written clearly and directly. For a brief second, something unfamiliar crossed his face. Not respect, not yet, but recognition. You have done this before, he said, more statement than question. Olivia held his gaze evenly. Something like it. Jason leaned back slightly, studying her now with a bit more attention. Well, do not get comfortable, he replied, masking that moment of doubt with his usual confidence. This is just the easy part. Olivia gave a faint, almost polite smile. I understand. As she turned to walk back to her desk, Jason's phone buzzed. He glanced down, his expression shifting instantly, softer now, almost charming. Hey, he answered, his voice low, stepping a few feet away. Olivia did not need to hear the words. The tone was enough. The same tone he had used before. The same tone he had used when he thought she was not worth keeping. She sat back down, her eyes lowering to her screen, but her mind remained alert. Every interaction, every word, every decision, it all added to the picture forming in front of her. This was no longer about what he had done to her. This was about who he truly was when given the chance to rise. Across the office, Jason laughed softly into the phone, completely at ease, completely unaware that the woman he had once dismissed as not enough was now the one quietly deciding exactly how far he would ever go. By the early afternoon, the office had shifted into a different kind of energy, one that carried a quiet edge beneath the usual routine. Conversations grew sharper, footsteps quicker, and eyes more observant than before. The announcement of the internal review had begun to settle into people's minds, and with it came something most of them try to hide. Fear. Not loud, not obvious, but present in the way emails were rechecked, in the way meetings were suddenly documented more carefully, in the way people adjusted their tone when speaking to those above them. Olivia noticed all of it. She sat at her desk, her screen filled with reports, but her attention moving far beyond numbers. She watched how people adapted when they believed they were being evaluated. Some became more polite, some more guarded, and some revealed exactly who they had always been. Jason Miller belonged firmly in the last group. We need to tighten this up, Jason said later that day, standing near a group of team members, his voice confident, controlled. If leadership is reviewing performance, then everything we present needs to look flawless. One of the junior analysts spoke up carefully. There are still some inconsistencies in the data from last quarter. We might need more time to correct them properly. Jason's expression hardened just slightly, enough to silence the room. No, he said. We do not need more time. We need better presentation. The analyst hesitated. But if the numbers are not accurate, it could raise questions. Jason stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not enough to hide the edge. Then do not give them a reason to ask questions, he replied. Clean it up. Make it consistent. That is what matters. Olivia's fingers paused on her keyboard as she listened, her eyes lowering slightly, masking the intensity of her focus. There it was. Not a mistake. Not pressure. A choice. The kind of choice that defined someone when no one important was watching. Around the group, no one challenged him further. They nodded, quietly returning to their work, adjusting figures, smoothing out irregularities, turning truth into something more convenient. Jason straightened, satisfied, and glanced across the room, his eyes landing briefly on Olivia. You, he said, pointing casually. Double-check the revisions before they go out. I do not want anything slipping through. Olivia met his gaze, her expression calm. Of course. He gave a short nod and walked away, already moving on to his next task, unaware of the weight of what he had just done. As the afternoon continued, Olivia worked through the revised reports, her movements precise, her thoughts deliberate. Each change told a story. Each adjustment revealed intent. By the time she finished, she understood something clearly. Jason was not reckless. He was strategic. He knew exactly where the lines were. He simply chose to stand as close to them as possible without stepping too far over. At least, not where anyone could easily prove it. A few desks away, the same junior analyst sat quietly, staring at his screen, his shoulders slightly tense. Olivia watched him for a moment before standing and walking over. Can I see the original data? She asked softly. He looked up surprised. The original? He repeated. Olivia nodded. Before the revisions. He hesitated, glancing briefly toward Jason's office, then back at her. I should not, he said under his breath. Olivia's voice remained steady, reassuring. You're not doing anything wrong by keeping a record of what was real. After a moment, he slowly turned his screen, showing her the untouched numbers. Olivia studied them carefully, her expression unreadable, but something behind her eyes sharpened. This was not just about ambition. This was about integrity being traded for advancement. And Jason had made that trade without hesitation. As she returned to her desk, the weight of the day settled into something colder, more focused. This was no longer a test of feelings or personal betrayal. This was a test of character, and Jason Miller was failing it in ways far more serious than he could ever imagine. Across the office, he leaned back in his chair, completely at ease, confident in the image he was building, unaware that every polished version of the truth he created was being quietly recorded, understood, and stored by the one person whose judgment would matter more than anything else when the time came. The next morning arrived with a quiet sense of anticipation that settled over the entire building like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. Olivia stepped out of the elevator onto the lower office floor once again, dressed simply, her presence blending seamlessly into the background, but her awareness sharper than ever. Today was different. Not because anything obvious had changed, but because she had already seen enough to understand exactly how this game was being played. And more importantly, who was playing it without hesitation. Across the office, Jason stood near the glass wall of a conference room, speaking with his senior manager, his posture confident, his gestures controlled, every word carefully chosen to impress. Olivia watched from a distance as she walked toward her desk, her expression calm, but her mind focused. He was good, not honest, not principled, but effective, and in an environment where perception often outweighed truth that made him dangerous. Olivia, Jason called out as soon as he noticed her. You are coming with me. She stopped, turning slightly. Where? He gestured toward the conference room. Strategy meeting. You could take notes. Try to keep up. Olivia gave a small nod, following him without question. Inside the room, several members of upper management were already seated, their conversations low but purposeful. As Olivia took a seat near the end of the table, her eyes briefly lifted to the far wall, where a large screen displayed company projections and growth metrics. Numbers she had approved herself only hours earlier in a different room, under a different identity. Jason began presenting shortly after, his voice steady, persuasive, weaving a narrative that was just close enough to the truth to sound convincing. Our team has identified key areas of optimization, he said, gesturing toward the screen. With minor adjustments, we can present stronger consistency across all reporting categories. Olivia's pen moved slowly across the page, though she was not truly writing notes. She was observing, listening, measuring. A senior manager leaned forward slightly. What kind of adjustments? Jason did not hesitate. Primarily alignment corrections. Nothing that changes the overall direction, just refining how the data is communicated. Olivia's eyes lowered briefly. Alignment corrections. Another way of saying something that sounded clean, controlled, acceptable. The manager nodded, satisfied enough to move on. The meeting continued, Jason growing more confident with every passing minute, unaware that the person taking notes at the end of the table was silently dissecting every word he spoke. When it ended, the room began to clear, chairs sliding back, conversations resuming in smaller groups. Jason gathered his materials, glancing at Olivia. Not bad, he said casually. You kept up. Olivia closed her notebook, meeting his eyes with a calm expression. It was clear. He gave a small, approving nod before turning away, already pulled into another conversation. As Olivia stepped out of the room, a voice behind her stopped her. You're not here to take notes. She turned to see Daniel Hayes standing a few feet away, his gaze steady, his tone low enough that no one else would hear. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Olivia allowed a faint shift in her expression, something closer to her true self. No, she said quietly. Daniel studied her for a brief second. He is crossing lines, he continued. Olivia's gaze moved past him, back toward the conference room, where Jason was still speaking confidently to another executive. I know, she replied. Daniel stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice further. Do you want me to step in? Olivia shook her head almost immediately. No, not yet. There was no hesitation in her answer. No doubt. Only control. Daniel watched her carefully, understanding more than most. Then what is the plan? Olivia's eyes returned to him, calm, precise, unwavering. Let him believe he is winning, she said. People always show the most when they think they are safe. Daniel held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. Understood. As he walked away, Olivia remained where she was for a brief second, her attention shifting back toward the movement of the office, the flow of conversations, the subtle shifts in behavior that revealed more than any report ever could. This was no longer about gathering information. It was about timing. And Jason Miller, standing just a few steps away, smiling, confident, completely unaware, was walking himself closer and closer to a moment that would define everything he thought he had built. The days that followed did not slow down. They sharpened, each hour peeling back another layer of the truth hidden beneath polished presentations and confident smiles. Olivia moved through the office like she had always been there, unnoticed, underestimated, and exactly where she needed to be. But now something else had changed. She was no longer just observing Jason Miller. She was studying him. And the more she watched, the clearer the pattern became. Late that afternoon, the team gathered again around a shared workspace, screens glowing, voices low but tense. Deadlines were closing in, and the pressure was beginning to show. Jason stood at the center of it all, directing, correcting, controlling the flow with an ease that almost looked like leadership until you paid closer attention. This section needs to be rewritten, he said, tapping a document on the screen. It sounds uncertain. One of the team members spoke carefully. It is uncertain. The numbers are still being verified. Jason did not even pause. Then make it sound certain, he replied. No one invests in hesitation. Olivia's eyes lifted slightly, watching the exchange. Again, not a mistake, a choice. The same pattern repeating, only now under more pressure, revealing more of who he really was. The team adjusted without argument. They rewrote, reframed, reshaped reality into something more appealing, something easier to sell. And Jason watched it happen with quiet satisfaction. Later, as the group began to disperse, Olivia remained behind, gathering the documents into a neat stack. Jason approached her, his tone casual but edged with expectation. "You are starting to understand how things work around here," he said. Olivia looked up at him, her expression neutral. "I am learning." He smirked slightly. "Good, because if you want to last, you need to be flexible. Facts matter less than how they are presented." Olivia held his gaze for a brief moment, letting that statement settle between them. "That depends on who is reading them," she said calmly. Jason let out a short laugh. "Trust me, the people who matter do not read details. They read confidence." He turned away before she could respond, already moving toward another conversation, already convinced of his own understanding of the world. Olivia watched him go, her mind registering every word, every belief he carried so easily. This was not just ambition. This was a philosophy. One, built on perception over truth, on control over integrity. And it was about to be tested in a way he could not predict. As the evening approached, most of the office began to empty out, lights dimming one row at a time. But Olivia remained at her desk, her screen now displaying something entirely different. Internal records, behavioral reports, performance evaluations that had never been filtered through team-level adjustments. Raw data, honest data, and Jason's profile stood out more with each line she read. High output, strong presentation, multiple flags for questionable reporting practices, each one quietly closed, each one dismissed before reaching anyone at the top. Olivia leaned back slightly, her eyes narrowing just enough to reveal the depth of her focus. This was how it happened, not with one large mistake, but with many small ones, overlooked, excused, normalized until they became part of the system itself. A soft knock on the edge of her desk broke her concentration. She looked up to see Daniel standing there, his expression thoughtful. "You are still here," he said. Olivia closed the file on her screen, though the information remained clear in her mind. "So are you," she replied. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. "I reviewed the same records," he said. "He has been doing this for a while." Olivia nodded once. Yes. There was no surprise in her tone, only confirmation. Daniel studied her for a moment. "You were right to wait," he said. "If we had stepped in earlier, it would have looked like an isolated issue." Olivia's gaze shifted briefly toward the darkened office beyond them, where Jason's desk still held the remnants of a day he believed had moved him closer to success. "Now, it is a pattern," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "And patterns are harder to defend." A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with understanding. "The event is in 2 days," Daniel added. "Everyone important will be there." Olivia stood slowly, smoothing her coat as she prepared to leave. "Good," she said. Daniel's eyes followed her, a hint of curiosity breaking through his usual composure. "You already know what you're going to do," he said. Olivia paused, her hand resting lightly against the back of her chair. For a brief second, her reflection flickered across the darkened screen beside her, no longer the quiet employee, but the woman, who had built everything around them. "Yes," she answered simply. Then she walked away, leaving behind a silent office and a carefully constructed illusion that was about to be exposed in front of everyone who mattered, while Jason Miller, somewhere in the city, continued to believe that he was only one step away from everything he had ever wanted, never realizing that the very foundation he was standing on was about to disappear beneath him. The morning of the event arrived with a quiet intensity that could be felt even before anyone stepped into the building. The air itself seemed different, charged with expectation, ambition, and something far more fragile beneath the surface. Inside the office, everything moved faster, sharper, more deliberate. People dressed better, spoke more carefully, smiled more often, even when they did not mean it. because tonight the owner would be there. And for most of them, it would be the first time they had ever seen her. Jason Miller stood in front of the mirror in the restroom, adjusting his tie with practiced precision, his reflection showing a man who believed he was ready for everything that was about to happen. He straightened his jacket, rolled his shoulders back, and allowed a small, confident smile to form. "This is it," he murmured to himself. "This is where everything changes." To him, this was a moment of arrival, a moment where all the small compromises, all the calculated decisions would finally pay off. He stepped out into the hallway, his stride steady, his focus clear. Across the building, Olivia Carter stood in a very different space. High above the main floors, in a quiet executive suite, she faced a mirror of her own. But this reflection was not the same as the one Jason had known. The simple clothes were gone, replaced by a tailored suit that fit her perfectly, sharp lines that spoke of authority without needing to announce it. Her hair was styled with effortless precision, her posture straight, her presence unmistakable. This was not a disguise. This was the truth. Behind her, Daniel stood near the window, watching the city stretch out below them. "Everything is ready," he said. Olivia did not respond immediately. She studied her reflection for a moment longer, not out of vanity, but out of clarity. The two versions of herself were no longer separate. They had merged into something stronger, something complete. "Good," she said finally. Daniel stepped closer, his tone steady. "Once you walk in, there's no going back." Olivia turned slightly, meeting his gaze. There was never a reason to go back. Her voice was calm, but beneath it was something undeniable. Finality. Daniel nodded once, understanding that this was not just a reveal. It was a decision, a line being drawn. Down on the main floor, the event space had been transformed. Soft lighting, polished surfaces, quiet music filling the air, and groups of employees and executives moving through the room, their conversations layered with anticipation. Jason stood among them, holding a glass in his hand, speaking with confidence to anyone who would listen. "The company is shifting," he said to a small group, his tone persuasive. "New leadership means new opportunities. The ones who stand out tonight will be remembered." A woman beside him smiled politely. "And you plan to be one of them?" Jason did not hesitate. "I already am." Laughter followed, light and approving. He thrived in it, in the attention, in the belief that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Across the room, conversations paused for just a fraction of a second as a subtle change moved through the space. Not loud, not announced, but felt. The doors at the far end opened quietly, and a small group of senior executives stepped aside. Daniel entered first, his presence commanding enough to draw attention, but not enough to explain the shift completely. And then Olivia followed. The room did not react immediately. It took a moment, a second, maybe two, for recognition to begin, for confusion to settle into something else, something sharper. Jason turned slightly, his attention caught by the movement, his eyes scanning the entrance with casual interest. And then he saw her. At first, it did not register. The suit, the confidence, the way the room seemed to adjust around her presence. It did not match the image in his mind. But then something deeper recognized something he could not ignore. The way she held herself, the way she looked at the room, not as a guest, but as someone who owned every inch of it. His expression shifted just slightly. Confusion, then doubt. And for the first time, something unfamiliar began to creep in. Uncertainty. Olivia walked forward with calm, measured steps, her gaze moving. Across the room, not searching but acknowledging. When her eyes finally met Jason's, she did not look surprised. She did not look hurt. She looked exactly the way she had in that moment when she stepped into the car and left him behind. Certain. And Jason Miller, standing in the middle of the room he thought would define his future, felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt small, and he did not yet understand why. The room did not erupt into chaos. It did something far more powerful. It went quiet. Conversations faded mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips, and attention shifted as if pulled by an invisible force toward the woman now standing at the center of the space. Olivia did not rush. She did not raise her voice. She simply walked forward, and the room adjusted around her, as if it had always been designed to do exactly that. Jason stood frozen, his mind struggling to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. This did not make sense. It could not. The woman he had dismissed, the woman he had walked away from without hesitation, now moved through the room with a presence that did not need explanation. Executives stepped toward her, greeting her with respect that was immediate and unquestioned. "Miss Carter," one of them said, extending a hand. Olivia accepted it with a small nod, her expression composed. "Thank you for coming." Another voice followed. "We are honored to have you back." Jason's grip tightened slightly around the glass in his hand. "Carter." The name echoed in his mind, slow at first, then louder, clearer, impossible to ignore. He looked around, searching for confirmation, for someone to correct what he thought he was understanding. But no one questioned it. No one hesitated. To them, this was not new. This was simply the truth returning to its place. Daniel stepped beside Olivia, his posture aligned with hers, his presence reinforcing what the room was already beginning to accept. "Everyone," he said, his voice steady, carrying easily across the space without force. "Allow me to formally welcome back the owner of this company." The final word landed with precision. "Owner." The room shifted again, subtle but undeniable. Eyes widened, shoulders straightened, and in that moment, every title, every ambition, every carefully constructed image in the room was silently recalibrated. Jason felt it like a drop beneath his feet. "Owner." He looked at Olivia again, really looked this time, and everything he had ignored began to rearrange itself in his memory. The calm, the confidence, the way she never reacted the way others did, the way she observed more than she spoke. It had been there all along. He just never saw it. Or worse, he never cared to look. Olivia's gaze moved across the room, acknowledging the people gathered there, but when it reached Jason, it did not pause in shock or anger. It rested there with quiet recognition, as if she had expected this exact moment. Jason took a step forward without thinking, his voice catching slightly as he tried to speak. "Olivia." The name sounded different now. Smaller, less certain. She did not move toward him. She did not rush to explain. Instead, she turned slightly, addressing the room with calm authority. "Tonight is not about introductions," she said. "It is about clarity." Her voice was even, controlled, carrying through the silence with ease. "Over the past several months, I've taken a step back to observe this company without influence, without position, and without recognition." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. "I wanted to understand what happens when people believe no one important is watching." Jason's breath slowed, his mind racing, each word tightening something in his chest. Olivia continued, her tone never rising, never faltering. "What I found was not just performance. It was character." She let that word settle, her eyes moving across the room again, measured, deliberate. "Some of you led with integrity. Some of you adapted under pressure. And some of you," her gaze returned to Jason, holding it now, steady, unshaken, "made choices that revealed exactly who you are when you believe there are no consequences." The silence deepened, heavier now, charged with something far more dangerous than anticipation. Jason swallowed, his confidence slipping in ways he could not control. "Olivia, I did not know," he said quickly, stepping closer, his voice lower now, almost urgent. "If I had known," she raised her hand slightly, stopping him without even looking away. "That is the point," she said calmly. "You did not know." Her words were not loud, but they cut deeper than anything he could have prepared for. Around them, the room watched, no longer as participants, but as witnesses, to something far more significant than a simple introduction. This was not just a reveal. This was a judgment. And Jason Miller, standing in the center of the future he thought he had earned, was beginning to understand that everything he had built was about to be measured against a standard he had never once considered. The silence did not break after Olivia spoke. It deepened, pressing in on every person in the room, forcing them to feel the weight of what had just been revealed. No one moved. No one spoke. Because now, this was no longer a celebration. It was an examination. Jason stood there, his mind racing, trying to recover, trying to regain control of a situation that had already slipped far beyond his reach. "Olivia, listen," he said again, his voice lower now, less certain, stripped of the confidence he had carried all evening. "You're taking this the wrong way. I did not know who you were. If I had known, I would have—" He stopped, realizing too late what he was about to say. The words hung unfinished, but the meaning was already clear to everyone watching. Olivia tilted her head slightly, her expression calm, almost curious. "You would have what?" she asked softly. Jason hesitated, his throat tightening, his usual smooth delivery gone. "I would have treated you differently," he admitted, the truth slipping out before he could reshape it. A faint murmur moved through the crowd, not loud, but enough to shift the atmosphere. Olivia nodded once, as if confirming something she had already known. "Exactly," she said. She took a small step forward, closing the distance just enough to make her presence impossible to ignore. "That is the problem." Her voice remained even, but every word landed with precision. "You did not treat me based on who I was. You treated me based on who you thought I was worth." Jason shook his head quickly. "That is not fair," he said, his tone rising slightly, desperation beginning to show. "Everyone makes decisions based on where they're going. I was trying to build something." Olivia's gaze did not soften. "And what you built," she replied, "was a version of yourself that only respects power when it is visible." The words cut cleanly, leaving no space for argument. Jason glanced around, suddenly aware of the eyes on him, the shifting expressions, the silent judgments forming in real time. He had spent months crafting an image, and now, in a matter of seconds, it was unraveling in front of everyone who mattered. Olivia turned slightly, addressing the room again, but without losing control of the moment. "Over the past several days," she continued, "I have reviewed performance across multiple levels of this company. Not just outcomes, but decisions. Not just results, but the methods used to achieve them." She paused, allowing the room to absorb her words. Because success without integrity is not success. It is risk. A few executives exchanged glances, understanding the implication immediately. Held his gaze for one last second, her expression neither cruel nor sympathetic, only certain. "You wanted to be seen," she said quietly. "Now you are." And in that moment, in front of the entire company he believed would elevate him, Jason Miller realized that everything he had hidden, everything he had justified, everything he had built on perception alone, was now fully exposed under a light he could not escape. The room did not return to normal after that. It could not. The music resumed quietly. Conversations attempted to restart, but something fundamental had shifted. The illusion of control, of predictability, had been broken, and everyone felt it. Jason stood exactly where he had been, but everything around him had changed. The faces that once looked at him with interest now carried something else. Distance, caution, judgment. He swallowed, his hands tightening slightly at his sides as he tried to steady himself, to regain some sense of footing. "This is not over," he said, more to himself than to anyone else, his voice low, strained. But no one responded, because for everyone else in that room, it already was. Across the floor, Olivia had stepped away from the center, her role in the moment complete, her presence no longer demanding attention, but still commanding it without effort. Daniel walked beside her as they moved toward a quieter section of the venue, the noise of the event fading into the background. "That was decisive," he said. Olivia did not slow her pace. "It needed to be," she replied. Her voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it, not of anger, but of responsibility. Daniel studied her for a moment. "You could have removed him immediately," he said. "You chose not to." Olivia paused near the edge of the room, her gaze moving briefly across the space before settling somewhere distant. "People reveal more when they're given time to explain themselves," she said. "And I want everything on record." Daniel nodded slowly. You're thinking long-term. Olivia turned slightly toward him. I always am. Meanwhile, Jason finally forced himself to move, stepping away from the center of the room, his mind racing, his thoughts colliding with a reality he had not prepared for. He moved through the crowd, no longer part of it, just passing through it, until he reached a quiet hallway just outside the main event space. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and for the first time all night, the silence was real. He leaned against the wall, exhaling sharply, his composure cracking just enough to let the truth in. Olivia Carter. The name repeated in his mind, over and over, each time hitting harder than the last. Owner. The realization was no longer abstract. It was undeniable. And everything he had said, everything he had done, had happened in front of the one person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else in that building. I did not know, he muttered, running a hand through his hair, pacing now, restless. But even as he said it, he understood how hollow it sounded. Because it did not matter. That was the point she had made. It never mattered who she was. It mattered who he chose to be when he believed she was no one. The hallway door opened quietly, and Jason turned, his expression tightening as he saw Daniel step out, the calm authority in his posture making the space feel even smaller. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jason straightened, forcing his voice to steady. I need to speak with her, he said. Daniel regarded him carefully. About what? Jason hesitated, searching for the right words, something that would restore control, something that would shift the narrative back in his favor. There has been a misunderstanding, he said finally. Daniel's expression did not change. No, he replied. There has not. The simplicity of the response hit harder than any accusation. Jason took a step forward, frustration breaking through. You do not understand, he said. I was building something. I made decisions based on what I thought was necessary. Daniel held his gaze, unshaken. And now you're being evaluated based on what you chose, he said. That is how this works. Jason's jaw tightened, his confidence slipping further, replaced now by something more desperate. Just let me talk to her, he insisted. Daniel was silent for a moment, then stepped slightly aside, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. If she wants to speak with you, she will, he said. Until then, you should consider what you're actually asking for. Jason frowned, confusion flickering across his face. Daniel's voice lowered slightly, his words deliberate. Because if you're asking for another chance, he continued, you need to understand what that really means. Not for your position, for who you are. Jason did not respond. He could not. Because for the first time, the question was not about his career, his image, or his ambition. It was about something he had never truly examined before. And as Daniel walked past him, leaving him alone in the quiet hallway, Jason Miller stood there, facing a truth that no strategy, no confidence, and no carefully constructed persona could protect him from. The game he thought he was playing had changed, and for the first time, he was no longer in control of how it would end. The hallway remained quiet long after Daniel walked away, but Jason did not move. He stood there, staring at nothing, replaying every moment in his mind with a clarity that felt almost unbearable. Every word he had said, every choice he had made, every time he had dismissed Olivia as if she were temporary, insignificant, replaceable. It all returned now, sharper, heavier, impossible to ignore. For the first time in a long time, Jason Miller did not have a strategy. He did not have a plan. He only had the truth, and it was not in his favor. Inside the event space, Olivia stood near the large windows overlooking the city, the lights stretching out beneath her like a map of everything she had built. The noise behind her had softened, conversations returning slowly, but with a different tone now, more careful, more aware. She did not turn when she heard the door open behind her. She already knew who it was. Jason walked in slowly, his steps less certain than they had ever been, his confidence replaced by something unfamiliar. Not weakness, but awareness. He stopped a few feet behind her, his voice quieter than before. Olivia. She did not respond immediately. She let the silence sit between them, not as punishment, but as space. Space for him to understand where he was standing now. Finally, she turned, her expression calm, composed, unchanged. "You wanted to speak," she said. It was not a question. Jason nodded, swallowing once before speaking. "I did not know," he began, but then he stopped himself, the words already feeling empty before they were even finished. He exhaled slowly, correcting himself. "That is not the point," he said instead, his voice more honest now. Olivia watched him, her gaze steady, giving nothing away. Jason continued, forcing himself to say what he had avoided before. "I made decisions based on what I thought mattered. Status, position, what someone could offer me. And I thought," he paused, the admission catching in his throat, "I thought you were not enough." The words landed heavily, but this time there was no arrogance behind them, only recognition. Olivia did not react with anger. She did not react at all. "I know," she said simply. Jason looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "But I was wrong," he added quickly. "Not because of who you are here. Not because of this." He gestured slightly around them, at the building, the power, everything he now understood she had always had. "Because of who you were before I knew any of this." Olivia studied him for a long moment, measuring not just his words, but the space between them, the intent behind them, the truth or lack of it. "And now?" she asked quietly. Jason hesitated, not because he did not have an answer, but because for once he was choosing his words carefully for the right reason. "Now I see that I chose the wrong things to value," he said, "and I cannot change what I did, but I understand it." The honesty in his voice was new, unpolished, not rehearsed. Olivia turned slightly, looking back out at the city for a moment before speaking again. "Understanding something after the fact does not erase it," she said. Jason nodded slowly. "I know." There was no argument left in him now, only acceptance. Olivia faced him again, her expression still calm, but no longer distant. "You asked for another chance," she said. Jason met her gaze, not with confidence, but with clarity. "Yes." She considered that for a brief moment, then spoke with quiet certainty. "You already had one." The words were simple, but they carried everything. Jason's expression tightened slightly, not in frustration, but in realization. That was what she meant before. He had been given the opportunity to show who he was. And he had. Olivia took a small step back, creating space once more, not as rejection, but as conclusion. "This is not about punishment," she continued. "It is about alignment. This company is built on trust, and trust is not something you earn in a moment. It is something you show consistently." Jason lowered his gaze briefly, absorbing the weight of that truth. Olivia's voice softened just slightly, not with sympathy, but with clarity. "You need to decide who you are without needing someone to prove your worth first," she said. Jason looked up at her again, something steadier now in his expression. Not hope, not expectation, but acceptance. "I understand," he said. And for the first time, it sounded like he actually did. Olivia gave a small nod, then turned back toward the room, her role in this moment complete. Jason remained where he was, watching her for a second longer before stepping back, not chasing, not arguing, not trying to change the outcome, because now he understood something he had not before. This was not a moment he could win. It was a moment he had already defined. And as Olivia walked forward into the future she had always controlled, Jason Miller stood still, no longer the man who believed he was rising, but someone who had finally begun to understand what it actually meant to deserve it. The weeks that followed did not unfold with drama or spectacle, but with something far more lasting. Change. Not loud, not immediate, but undeniable. The internal audit moved forward with precision, each report reviewed carefully, each decision examined without bias. And when it was complete, the outcome was clear. Jason Miller was no longer part of the company. There was no public humiliation, no announcement made to draw attention. Just a quiet removal, handled with the same professionalism the company demanded from everyone within it. Because in the end, it was never about revenge. It was about standards. Jason packed his things in silence, the office around him continuing as it always had, people working, conversations moving, the world not stopping for his loss. But this time, he did not feel anger. He did not feel cheated. He felt something else. Accountability. Each step he took out of the building felt heavier than the last. Not because of what he had lost, but because of what he now understood. Outside, the city moved the same way it always did, cars passing, people walking, life continuing without pause. Jason stopped on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the building that once represented everything he thought he wanted. And for the first time, he did not see opportunity. He saw a mirror, one that had shown him exactly who he had been when he believed no one important was watching. And now, he had to decide who he would become without that illusion. Inside, on the upper floors, Olivia stood in the same executive space where this had all begun, the city stretching out before her once again. But this time, there was no weight in her chest. No unanswered questions. Only clarity. Daniel stepped into the room quietly, a file in his hand, but his expression lighter than before. "It is done," he said. Olivia nodded once, not needing further explanation. "And the team?" she asked. Daniel placed the file on the table. "Stronger," he replied. "More careful, more aware." Olivia allowed a faint smile to touch her lips. "Good." There was a brief pause before Daniel spoke again, his tone shifting slightly, more personal now. "You did not just fix a problem," he said. "You changed the way people think about their choices." Olivia turned slightly toward him. "That was the goal." Daniel studied her for a moment, then added quietly, "And what about you?" Olivia did not answer right away. She looked out at the city, her reflection faint in the glass, but no longer divided between two identities. There was no disguise left, no separation between who she was and who she allowed others to see. "I am done hiding," she said finally. Daniel nodded, as if that was the answer he expected. Over the next few days, Olivia made her presence known throughout the company, not through announcements or displays of authority, but through consistency. She walked the floors openly, spoke with employees directly, listened without pretense. And slowly, the culture shifted, not because people were afraid, but because they understood. Integrity was not optional. It was expected. One afternoon, as Olivia moved through the lower office level, she paused briefly near a familiar desk. It was no longer Jason's. Someone else had taken the space, someone quieter, more focused, someone who worked without needing attention to validate their effort. Olivia watched for a moment, then continued on, her steps steady, her purpose clear. Later that evening, as the building began to empty and the lights dimmed one by one, Olivia stood once more by the window, the city glowing beneath her. Daniel joined her again, his presence now easy, natural. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. Olivia glanced at him. "What?" Letting him go through it instead of stopping it earlier. Olivia considered the question briefly, then shook her head. "No," she said, "because the truth matters more when it is chosen, not forced." Daniel smiled slightly. "And now?" Olivia looked back out at the city, her voice calm, certain. "Now I build something better." There was no hesitation in her tone, no doubt, just direction. And somewhere out in that same city, Jason Miller walked a very different path, one without shortcuts, one without illusions, one where every step required something he had only just begun to understand. Effort without deception, progress without pretense, growth without pretending to be someone he was not. The story did not end with punishment. It ended with clarity, with choices, with consequences that led to something more honest than before. Because in the end, success was never about who had power. It was about who deserved it when no one was watching. And that was a truth neither of them would ever forget.